The challenge was meant to humiliate her. The way he said it, low, confident, dismissive, made everyone at the table pause their laughter and turn. "Solve this and I'll marry you," sneered the millionaire, tapping the rim of his glass with a silver pen. He didn't expect her to answer. He expected her to blush, stutter, and retreat the way most people did when standing too close to his arrogance. But instead, she smiled. "Before we go further, subscribe if you believe that love still changes people, because this story will make you remember why humility always wins in the end." Her name was Clara Reynolds, 28, a waitress at the upscale Manhattan bistro called the Lantern Room, the kind of place where the cutlery sparkled like jewelry and people paid more for a single bottle of wine than she earned in a week. She moved through the restaurant with quiet grace, refilling glasses, carrying plates, noticing things no one else did, like who was kind and who wasn't. That night at table 17, Ethan Vale was not kind. He was everything people whispered about: brilliant, ruthless, young enough to still be called a prodigy, but old enough to have forgotten what humility felt like. The CEO of Vale Dynamics, a multi-billion-dollar tech empire that had reshaped industries and ruined competitors overnight. His name was printed in magazines beside words like visionary, untouchable, dangerous. To the world, he was perfection in a three-piece suit. To those who worked for him, he was an equation with no empathy left in it. To Clara, he was just another customer who couldn't look a waitress in the eyes. The restaurant buzzed with muted conversation and polished laughter. Ethan sat surrounded by investors and board members, all older men who nodded at his every word. He was explaining an algorithm, something abstract about behavioral prediction models, when Clara arrived with the wine. She waited politely for him to notice her. He didn't. He was too busy dissecting the world as if it were a problem waiting to be solved. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Should I pour from the left or right?" He looked up, irritation flashing across his face before melting into faint curiosity. Her tone wasn't submissive. It was steady, almost amused. No one ever interrupted Ethan Vale. "Left," he said. "Always left." She poured without spilling a drop, thanked him, and started to walk away. But one of the men at the table, slick hair, loud voice, the kind of man who treated waitresses as scenery, smirked and said, "Maybe she could solve your new puzzle, Ethan." The table laughed. Ethan didn't, but something cruel and restless in him stirred. "Solve my puzzle?" he repeated. Then, turning toward Clara, "Tell me, Miss Reynolds," she said, folding her hands behind her back. "Miss Reynolds," he said slowly, "imagine I have two companies, one worth 10 billion, one worth 10,000. I merge them, but one of them is lying about its value. If the market reacts emotionally instead of rationally, what's the true worth of the merger?" The men chuckled. It was a nonsense question, the kind of arrogance disguised as intellect. Clara blinked once, her expression unchanging. "Depends," she said softly. "Is the liar convincing?" Ethan tilted his head. "Meaning?" "Meaning, numbers only matter when people believe them," she said. "If emotion drives the market, then the merger's value isn't 10 billion or 10,000. It's a story worth whatever people are desperate enough to believe." Silence. The laughter died instantly. One of the investors coughed. Ethan stared at her, genuinely caught off guard. "Interesting," he said finally, his voice lower now. "So, value is an illusion." "Not illusion," she said. "Influence." It was the first time in years anyone had spoken to him that way, not with fear or flattery, but clarity. She picked up the empty tray and walked away, her steps measured, her head high. He watched her go, and something inside him, something rusted and cold, shifted slightly out of place. The men at the table started talking again, pretending to find it funny, but Ethan wasn't listening. His gaze followed her until she disappeared into the kitchen. For the first time in a long while, his mind wasn't thinking about profit margins or AI models. It was thinking about a woman who saw through him in 30 seconds flat. After the dinner ended, Ethan stayed behind. The waitstaff cleaned around him, unsure whether to ask him to leave. Clara carried a stack of plates past his table, avoiding his eyes. "Miss Reynolds," he said quietly. She froze, then turned. "Yes, sir? You surprised me tonight." "I wasn't trying to," she replied. "That's what made it interesting." He leaned back, studying her. "Tell me, what's someone like you doing here? You don't sound like a waitress, and you don't sound like someone who needs to ask questions he already knows the answers to." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Touché." She didn't smile back. "I work because I need to, that's all." He nodded slowly. Need and want are the only things that move the world. Or ruin it, she said, and walked away again. He should have let her go. He told himself she was just another sharp mind wasted on small wages and tired feet. But there was something about her composure, an intelligence that didn't beg for recognition, a warmth that didn't fade under pressure, that unsettled him more than any business rival ever could. When he left the restaurant that night, he found her outside, sitting on the back steps during her break, tying her apron tighter against the cold. The city lights painted her in silver and gold. "Do you always solve riddles that aren't yours?" he asked, stepping closer. "Only when they come with bad manners," she said without looking up. He laughed softly. "I deserved that." "Yes," she said. "You did." He studied her face, tired but kind, unguarded, yet strong. "What would you have done if I hadn't liked your answer?" "Nothing," she said simply. "Truth doesn't need approval." He looked away, unsettled again. No one ever said things like that to him. Not since before the money. Not since before his father's empire taught him that emotion was weakness. "Good night, Miss Reynolds." "Good night, Mr. Vale." As he walked toward his car, he realized something he hadn't felt in years, curiosity that wasn't strategic. For the first time in his meticulously calculated life, he wanted to see someone again without knowing why. And Clara Reynolds, still sitting on those cold back steps, didn't know that the man who left her that night would return, not to win, but to learn what no fortune had ever taught him. The next morning, Ethan Vale sat in his penthouse office on the 87th floor of Vale Tower, staring at the skyline that was supposed to remind him he'd conquered the city. Yet all he saw were reflections, glass on glass, illusions on illusions. The conversation with Clara played in his mind like a haunting melody he couldn't silence. Truth doesn't need approval. Her words had sliced through the sterile perfection of his world. His assistant, a precise woman named Harper, interrupted. "You've got the board in 15, sir." He nodded absently. "Harper, find out who manages the Lantern Room's staffing." She blinked. "The restaurant?" "Yes, the one on West 44th. She hesitated. "May I ask why?" "No." His tone closed the topic, but his reflection in the glass smirked faintly, as if mocking his own curiosity. 15 minutes later, he was in the boardroom, surrounded by executives who spoke in profits and projections. He led the meeting flawlessly, every gesture measured, every answer sharp. But somewhere between the charts and the chatter, he drifted, back to the warmth of the restaurant's lights, back to the quiet steadiness in Clara's eyes. By noon, he had her employee file. No background scandal, no connections, no hidden ambition, just an ordinary woman surviving the city. Yet something in that simplicity drew him more than all the powerful people who filled his calendar. That evening, he returned to the Lantern Room. Clara was there, balancing a tray of champagne glasses. When she saw him, her expression flickered. Surprise, then suspicion. She walked over slowly, keeping her composure. "Back so soon, Mr. Vale?" He ignored the irony. "I was in the neighborhood." She gave him a look that said, "You weren't. Would you like your usual table?" "No," he said. "This time, I'll sit at the counter." The hostess raised an eyebrow but obeyed. Billionaires didn't sit at the counter, yet Ethan did, watching as Clara moved behind the bar, pouring drinks with practiced ease. "You're going to make people talk," she said quietly. "Let them." She shook her head. "You really don't understand ordinary people, do you?" "I'm trying to." That caught her off guard. "Why?" He thought for a moment. "Because I think I've forgotten what they look like up close." Her hands paused mid-motion. "We don't look like anything, Mr. Vale. We're just people." He smiled faintly. "Exactly." She slid him a cup of black coffee. "On the house. To remind you that not everything needs to be bought." He sipped it. It was bitter and perfect. "I might start believing you're here to ruin my reputation. Only the parts that deserve it." He laughed, quiet and genuine. For a few minutes they spoke easily. About books. About the absurdity of the city. About nothing and everything. She was sharp without arrogance, honest without cruelty. Every answer she gave revealed a depth he didn't expect, and every question she refused reminded him how guarded she still was. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Harper. "Press leaking rumor of Vale Bright merger. Must respond immediately." He silenced it. Clara noticed. "You can take it. It can wait. You're a CEO. Nothing waits." He looked at her, his tone soft but firm. "This does." For a moment, neither spoke. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in anyone's for years, an unspoken refusal to be impressed. The restaurant filled up again, laughter and silverware echoing through the air. When she moved away to serve another table, he realized something unsettling. He wanted her approval. Not admiration, not attention. Approval. He left without saying goodbye, but she found a folded napkin on the counter when she returned. Written in careful, deliberate handwriting, "Next time you ask the question." The following day, Clara couldn't stop thinking about him. She hated that she did. Men like Ethan Vale didn't notice women like her. Not really. They noticed reflections of themselves in whoever stared long enough. Still, something in his eyes last night had been different. Not the predatory interest she'd seen in rich customers before, but a quiet confusion, like a man realizing for the first time that money couldn't translate the language of sincerity. At home, in her small apartment overlooking a brick alley, she opened the notebook where she scribbled thoughts between shifts. On the first page, she wrote one line. "He looks at people like equations, but maybe he's trying to solve himself." By the end of the week, Ethan had found a reason to return again, and again after that. He always chose the counter, always ordered black coffee, always left something small behind, a folded napkin with a thought, a question, a quote. Nothing flirtatious, nothing forced, just connection in fragments. What makes truth harder to tell, the risk of rejection or the weight of being right? Do you believe people can unlearn who success made them become? At first, she ignored them. Then, one night, she wrote back, "Truth doesn't break people. It only shows who they already were." He smiled when he read it. Their exchanges became a quiet ritual, words replacing what neither dared to say out loud. And though no one in the restaurant knew, something was shifting. For Ethan, it was an awakening. For Clara, a warning. Because the closer he came, the more she felt the danger, not of his power, but of his sincerity. One evening, after closing, she found him waiting outside. No driver, no entourage, just him, standing under a streetlight, looking almost human in the dim glow. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I needed to ask you something," he replied. "Off the record." She crossed her arms. "Go ahead." He hesitated, then said, "Do you think love is something you can earn, or something you have to deserve first?" She studied him carefully. "Why are you asking me?" "Because," he said, voice lower now, "you're the only person who'd give me an honest answer." Her chest tightened. "It's not about earning or deserving. Love isn't a reward, Ethan, it's a choice. The problem is," she paused, "you treat everything like a transaction." He looked at her, the truth landing hard. "And what if I don't want to anymore?" "Then stop calculating," she said softly. "Start feeling." He nodded slowly, as if the concept itself were revolutionary. "Good night, Mr. Vale." "Good night, Miss Reynolds." As she walked away, he realized something terrifying. He didn't want her to call him Mr. Vale anymore, and she, though she wouldn't admit it yet, had begun to wonder what it might feel like to say his name without regret. But the city never allows peace for long, and somewhere in Ethan's empire, a storm was already forming, one that would test everything they hadn't yet said. Harper found him on the mezzanine between floors, standing at the glass rail as if gravity were a rumor. Morning light sheeted off the tower across the avenue, turning the city into a field of mirrors. "You have the press call at 10, the merger council at 11, and Sloan wants you in his office before both," she said, efficient as weather. "Tell Sloan I'll see him after lunch." Ethan's voice was even, but Harper heard the deviation. He never rescheduled Sloan. "Understood." She hesitated, then added quietly, "You've been different this week." He almost smiled. "Learning a new language. That waitress?" "That person," he corrected, soft and final. Harper's approval was a flicker, quickly banked. "There's a car downstairs when you're ready." He wasn't ready. He left the building alone. He found Clara in the one place in this city where time still walked, the public library's old wing. She sat by a window that cupped a low winter sun, a second-hand coat folded beside her, a notebook in her lap. He didn't speak at first. He just watched her read, as if the page were telling her something she'd been waiting to hear. "Mr. Vale?" she said without looking up, which made him laugh despite himself. "Ethan," he said. "Just Ethan. If you can manage it." She closed the book. "Depends if you can manage ordinary." "I'm trying," he said, and meant it. They walked the stacks with the conspiratorial quiet of children in a church. He told her one piece of truth he had told no one, that the thing he'd built, the predictive models the world worshipped, had begun to frighten him. "It's not the accuracy," he said. "It's the intention. Everyone wants to use it to remove uncertainty, but uncertainty is where people change, or where they break," she said. They found an empty table near a map of an older Manhattan with streets that no longer existed. He took a small box from his coat, black, weighty, unbranded, and set it between them. "This is either reckless or overdue," he said. "My father left me a problem when he died. A private one. I've never solved it. I don't show it to people." "What makes me qualified?" she asked. "You're the only person who doesn't try to impress the answer into being." He opened the box. Inside lay a watch the color of ash with a cracked sapphire face. The inner ring held numbers that weren't ours. 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9. Not in order. Along the edge, an engraving. "Trust is the only equation that solves itself." Clara touched the cool metal with 2 fingers, her brow furrowing. "Pi out of sequence," she murmured. "But why this arrangement? It's a cipher." He loved games. Ethan's voice thinned at the edges. He didn't love people. She turned the crown and watched the second hand stumble, then catch. "Your father wanted you to prove you were him to access something," she said. "You never could because you aren't. What do you see?" "I see spite in beautiful clothing." She angled the watch to the light, tracing the tick's shadow. "What did he believe trust was?" "Debt repaid," Ethan said bleakly. "Then this is wrong by design. He set you to fail the way he taught you to win." The sentence sat between them like a rescue and a wound. She lifted the watch to her ear and listened. "Do you hear that?" she asked. He shook his head. She counted softly, eyes unfocused as if following a distant metronome. 3, 1, 2, no, 3, 1, 4, pause. Her finger landed on the half-hidden stem by the case. She pressed. The back clicked open. Inside, beneath a wafer of vellum, lay a key and a card for a safe deposit box at an old downtown bank. An address, a name, Lionel Vale. The date was 20 years old. Ethan exhaled something that wasn't quite a laugh. "I spent 5 years trying to crack a sentence on the outside. You listened." "Machines miss heartbeat," she said, folding the vellum, giving him the key. He turned it in his hand, the groove biting his skin. He felt 12 again and 40, triumphant and small. "Come with me?" She didn't answer immediately. He could see the calculus run across her face, the danger of proximity, the thrill of honesty, the line between a rich man, poor woman cliché and a true step towards something neither of them knew the shape of. "If I go," she said, "you don't get to turn this into a performance." "My father taught me performance," he said. "You're teaching me presence." They took the subway. He could have called a car. He didn't. The train roared like an enormous animal learning to breathe. People pressed close, too close for titles. He watched how Clara stood, weight over heels, hand lightly on the pole, the same poise she used to carry 5 full plates at once. A boy across the aisle fell asleep on his mother's shoulder. An elderly man in a navy watch cap stared at Ethan and didn't recognize him, which arrived as a gift wrapped in cardboard. At the bank, the manager's eyebrows rose an inch when he saw the name on the card. "I'll need identification." Ethan showed him 2. "We haven't seen anyone for box 318 since..." The man trailed off and changed the subject. They followed him past the brass gate, down to where the floor smelled like paper and metal, into a quiet, long as winter. The box was thin and long and heavy. The manager left them with a discreet nod. Ethan set it on the table with reverence that embarrassed him. Clara sat, hands in her lap. He worked the key. The lock refused, then surrendered. Inside, an envelope with his name in Lionel's exacting hand, a stack of documents, a thumb drive, and a photograph so unexpected his vision blurred. A woman in a white lab coat stood beside Lionel, somewhere clinical, somewhere guarded. She was smiling at the camera the way people do when someone else tells them how. On her coat, a stitched name, Maeve Reynolds. Clara did not reach for it. She stared and did not blink. "My mother," she said, and the sentence seemed to rearrange the room. Ethan looked again as if the letters might shift. The mouth was Clara's, the eyes were not. He tasted iron. She left when I was a child. Nobody said why, only that there was a job she had to keep." Her voice was steady, but it had no place to stand. He slid the photo toward her. She didn't touch it. She was looking at the documents beneath, titles ringing in the fluorescent light. Predictive Behavioral Protocol, Private, Consent Architecture, Revision, Veil Dynamics, Internal Trial Memos. He understood before she said it. It wasn't just a watch or a father's cruelty or a petty riddle. It was a ledger of the original sin that built his kingdom, and it held her mother's name beside his father's. He pulled the letter. The seal cracked like old paint. Lionel's handwriting marched across the page with its usual arrogance, and yet there was something else, a falter, a pride he'd never offered Ethan in person. "You will think this is about inheritance. It is not. It is about origin. We built a cathedral of prediction. To do that, we trespassed. Maeve tried to stop me. She took what proof she could and left. If you're reading this, the proof is now yours. Decide whether to keep what I made or become what I never could, accountable." Clara's hands had become fists. Ethan could not find where to place his own. Noise from the vault corridor carried in, someone closing a drawer, a polite cough. The world persisted indecently. "My mother worked for your father," she said. She warned him. He ignored her and used her work anyway. "It's worse," he said, throat dry. He lifted the next document. The signature at the bottom of the consent waiver was Lionel's. The counter-signature was Maeve's, then crossed out in a pen stroke so violent the paper had torn. Above it, subject pool, underserved communities, waiver of full disclosure. Clara flinched, even reading the phrase. He tested on people who believed him. "We marketed it as pilot programs for access and opportunity." Ethan's mouth ached around the platitude. "I believed." "You believed whatever made the numbers sing." She wasn't cruel, she was exact. He closed the box because he had no right to keep it open. He looked at her, and for the first time in his adult life, had nothing to offer. No justification, no plan, no armor. "This touches everything I've built. It touches everything I am," she said. They walked out into a day that had become too bright. On the steps, the air was knife cold. Traffic soldered itself into a single continuous hiss. He passed the envelope to her because he could not keep it. "It's yours," he said. "Your mother trusted you more than she trusted anyone else in that room. I can fix a balance sheet. I can't rewrite this without you." "You won't rewrite it at all," she said. "You'll tell it." "I will," he said, and understood the cost as he spoke it. She looked past him. Across the street, a man with a camera pretended to check his phone. Near the curb, a woman in a camel coat and sunglasses was not looking at them with a not-looking that was meticulous. Harper materialized at the corner, moving fast, eyes taking everything in. She reached them with a breath to spare. "Sloane's on the warpath," she said, voice low. "Someone leaked that you've been meeting a civilian off schedule. They're going to spin you as compromised before you can—" She saw the envelope, the word consent, and her intelligence recalibrated. "What did you find?" "Reason," Clara said. "For then we run toward it," Harper replied, and in that instant chose a side that would cost her as well. A black town car turned the corner too slowly, windows too dark. Ethan felt the old life tighten its fist around his throat. He turned to Clara, to the only gravity in the room that felt true. "If I call a press conference," he said, "if I put this on record with your mother's name, if I burn it all down, will you stand beside me while I do it?" Clara looked at the watch in his palm, the hairline crack a fault line between two eras. The answer that rose in her was not mercy and not vengeance. It was something sharper, moral courage with hands. "You don't need me to stand beside you to do the right thing," she said. "You need to do the right thing so you can stand beside me." The town car door opened. A man stepped out who had never in his life been late. Sloane. And Ethan, who had learned a week ago to listen for the pause in a ticking watch, understood they had one breath to choose the future they could live with, or the one that would live without them. Sloane's voice carried over the traffic like gravel dragged across stone. "You brought a waitress into the vault? Are you out of your mind?" His coat was open, the tailored wool cutting sharp lines against the chaos of the street. "You think a confession redeems you? The board won't just remove you. They'll bury you under litigation until you beg for the silence your father bought." Ethan didn't flinch. Maybe silence is the problem. He held the envelope tighter. "We took what wasn't ours. People deserve to know." Sloane's laugh was short, practiced. "People don't care. They consume outrage, forget it by morning, and the machine keeps running. You burn this company, you burn yourself." "I know." "Then why?" "Because she's standing here," Ethan said simply. "And I can't look at her and pretend ignorance is integrity." Clara's eyes met his, steady, unreadable. Sloane followed his gaze, realizing too late that the balance of power had already shifted. "You're really letting her rewrite your story," he sneered. "She's helping me write it honestly," Ethan replied. Sloane stepped closer. "You want honesty, here's truth. That woman's mother took the payout, walked away, and left us to carry the blame. You're protecting a ghost veil. You'll die for someone else's mistake." Clara's voice cut through him like glass. "My mother didn't take a payout. She refused it. She disappeared because your world doesn't forgive people who tell the truth." Sloane's smirk faltered. "Careful, sweetheart. You're talking to men who can make you disappear too. Ethan moved faster than he thought he could. His hand gripped Sloane's arm, voice low, dangerous. Don't finish that sentence. For a moment, the three of them stood in the cold wind, money, morality, and fear, wrestling in silence. Then Harper's phone buzzed. It's the press, she said. They know you're here. Ethan looked at Clara. We go public now before they twist it. She hesitated. Are you sure? He nodded. If I wait, I'll rationalize it. That's what men like me do. You said it yourself. Truth doesn't need approval. Sloane's jaw clenched. If you do this, the entire Vale legacy dies with you. Ethan met his stare. Then maybe it deserves to. He turned toward Harper. Call the station, set it up live. Harper nodded once and started typing, already moving down the steps. Clara stayed still, the envelope clutched to her chest. Sloane exhaled a bitter laugh. You'll regret this. You think she's your redemption, but when you're broke and nameless, she'll walk away too. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting. You really think love ends where money does? That's why you'll never understand him or me. Sloane shook his head, disgusted, and turned to leave. When this collapses, don't call me. I won't, Ethan said. He and Clara started walking the opposite direction. The city swallowed the argument, turning it into the hum of engines and wind. Inside a cafe nearby, Harper was already coordinating with a journalist she trusted. One condition, Ethan said when they joined her. No editing, no framing. We speak it all, as it is. The journalist hesitated. That could end your company, your shareholders. I'm not saving a company, he interrupted. I'm saving what's left of its humanity. They set the time for that evening, prime hour, live broadcast. The network wanted the confession that could topple one of the world's largest corporations. Ethan only wanted the silence afterward, the kind that came from telling the truth. When the room emptied, he turned to Clara. You don't have to be there. Yes, I do, she said softly. It's my mother's story too. He looked at her for a long time. You realize once we do this, there's no turning back. She nodded. Then we don't turn back. The hours until nightfall felt like the longest of his life. He paced the rooftop of the building across from his own tower, the one that bore his name in steel letters. Below, the city pulsed, oblivious. Clara stood beside him, her hands tucked in her coat pockets, her breath visible in the cold. Do you ever wonder, she asked quietly, if your father knew what he was doing to you? All the time, he said, but I think he believed it was love, the kind that teaches through cruelty, the kind that leaves scars so deep you mistake them for proof. She turned to him. Then maybe tonight you prove love doesn't have to hurt to be real. He looked at her, and for the first time since he could remember, there was no strategy in his gaze, only gratitude. You make it sound simple. It is, she said. You just forgot. The call came through. Harper's voice. Studio's ready. Car in 10 minutes. Ethan nodded, but his eyes stayed on Clara. If this goes wrong, it won't, she interrupted, because we're not doing it for power. We're doing it for peace. He smiled faintly. Peace. I've never been rich enough to afford that. You are now. They left the rooftop together, their footsteps echoing like punctuation marks against the silence of their decision. By the time they reached the studio, the city had already scented blood. Cameras lined the entrance, flashes bursting like lightning. Reporters shouted questions, desperate for a headline. Ethan kept his hand lightly at Clara's back, guiding her forward, not protectively but as if grounding himself in her presence. Inside, the air buzzed with electric heat. The host greeted them, surprised by their calm. Are you sure you want this live? He asked again. Ethan nodded. No filters, no edits. If I fall, let it be seen. Clara took a seat beside him, the envelope in her lap. When the red light above the camera turned on, the world leaned in to listen. He began with a breath. My name is Ethan Vale. For years, my company built technology that predicted human behavior. What the world didn't know is that we tested it on people who never gave consent. Communities promised opportunity were turned into data. That's how we built an empire. The anchor glanced at the producer. This was more than expected. Ethan continued, his voice steady. My father, Lionel Vale, led that deception. My silence made me complicit. But the woman beside me, Clara Reynolds, found the truth. Her mother, Maeve Reynolds, tried to stop it and paid the price for telling the truth. Clara unfolded the documents slowly, laying them before the cameras. This is proof, she said, her voice trembling but clear. My mother refused to sign the consent. They erased her and buried her work. We're here to make sure she's remembered. The room was silent. The city, watching from countless screens, seemed to hold its breath. Ethan looked into the lens. The first time he had ever truly faced the world without armor. There's a price for what I'm saying tonight. I accept it, because truth without consequence isn't truth. It's PR. The broadcast ended with nothing rehearsed, nothing resolved, just two people sitting in the glare of honesty. Outside, as they stepped into the cold again, the first calls from his lawyers were already coming through. The board would fire him by morning. The headlines would call him reckless, insane, maybe even heroic. He didn't care. He turned to Clara. "Do you regret it?" She shook her head. "No. Do you?" "Not anymore." And as they walked into the night, together, unshielded, free, the wind carried a faint echo of something neither had known they could still feel. Peace. But peace never arrives without its shadow. Somewhere high above, in a dark office lit by screens, Sloan watched the broadcast replay and whispered to himself, "If he wants truth, let's see how much of it he can survive." 2026, 11/10/2025, Philippe Goulart. Sloan's voice carried over the traffic like gravel dragged across stone. "You brought a waitress into the vault? Are you out of your mind?" His coat was open, the tailored wool cutting sharp lines against the chaos of the street. "You think a confession redeems you? The board won't just remove you, they'll bury you under litigation until you beg for the silence your father bought." Ethan didn't flinch. Maybe silence is the problem. He held the envelope tighter. "We took what wasn't ours. People deserve to know." Sloan's laugh was short, practiced. "People don't care. They consume outrage, forget it by morning, and the machine keeps running. You burn this company, you burn yourself." "I know." "Then why?" "Because she's standing here," Ethan said 2026, 11/10/2025, Philippe Goulart. The morning after the broadcast, the city was louder than it had ever been. News vans lined the street outside Vale Tower, their antennas pointed at the sky like desperate prayers for more scandal. Headlines screamed across every screen, "The millionaire who burned his empire for love and truth." Inside the tower, silence reigned. The lobby fountain was turned off, the receptionist gone, the company crest removed from the marble wall overnight. Ethan walked through it slowly, each step echoing like the past catching up. The board had issued an emergency statement before dawn. Vale Dynamics denies all allegations pending investigation. In corporate language, it meant exile. He was no longer CEO, no longer billionaire, just a man in an immaculate suit with nothing left to own but his choices. Clara waited outside, watching the mob of reporters from the other side of the street. When he emerged, they surged forward. Microphones, cameras, noise. "Mr. Vale, is it true you falsified data? Was it all for her? What happens to the company now?" He didn't answer. Clara's hand found his, small and sure, guiding him through the storm until the noise faded behind car doors and tinted glass. In the quiet of the ride, she finally spoke. "You don't have to face them alone anymore." He looked at her, tired, hollow, but lighter somehow. "I was never afraid of them," he said softly. "Only of what they'd turn me into if I stayed." She smiled faintly. "Then you made it out alive." "Alive," he repeated. "That's new." The car took them to the edge of the city, to the community center Clara had helped build from the ashes of a neighborhood Ethan's own projects had once threatened to erase. The people there didn't care about headlines. They saw two human beings walking toward them, one humbled, one brave. Inside, a group of students sat around a table covered in old laptops. Clara had started a free tech literacy program, teaching kids how to code, how to question, how to rebuild. "This was my mother's dream," she said. "Not revenge, just giving people back their power." Ethan stood beside her, watching as she handed a young girl a keyboard. "You're doing what I should have done," he said. "You're doing it now," she replied. He spent the rest of the day helping quietly. No speeches, no cameras, just his hands fixing wires, and his mind learning what purpose felt like without profit. Every child who smiled at him erased a little more of who he used to be. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Clara found him outside, sitting on the steps. The air smelled of rain and metal. She sat beside him, pulling her coat tighter. "You know they'll come after you harder now," she said. "The board, the investors, Sloan." "I know. Do you think it was worth it?" He turned to her, his expression soft but certain. "Truth usually costs everything. That's how you know it's real." She looked down at their hands, fingers brushing. "And what now?" He smiled, small and real. "Now I build something honest. Maybe not a company. Maybe just a life." The rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. She didn't move. Neither did he. They sat in the storm as if it were cleansing them both. Later that night, back in her apartment, the world seemed impossibly quiet. She brewed tea while he stared out the window, the city lights fractured by rain. On her table lay the old watch, the one that had started everything. She picked it up and wound it carefully. "You kept it," she said. "I couldn't throw away the reminder," he murmured. "It's broken, but it still ticks. Kind of like me." She smiled. "Maybe it's not broken. Maybe it just needed a different rhythm." He looked at her, eyes warm. "You talk like a poet. You listen like someone who finally learned how." Something unspoken passed between them. Not the rush of desire or the tension of forbidden love, but the quiet gravity of two souls recognizing each other after surviving the fire. "I should go," he said, standing. "You could stay," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. "Wouldn't that complicate things?" "Life's already complicated," she said, meeting his eyes. "But maybe it's time something beautiful came from it." He stayed. They didn't talk much that night. They didn't need to. It wasn't passion that filled the space, but peace. The kind that arrives only when the truth is finally spoken and heard. When dawn crept in, Ethan woke first. The rain had stopped. Clara slept beside him, her hair tangled against his shoulder. For a moment, he just watched her breathe. It felt like forgiveness taking shape. He rose quietly, walked to the window, and looked out at a city that no longer belonged to him. Yet for the first time he didn't feel loss. He felt beginning. Behind him, Clara stirred. "What are you thinking?" she murmured. "That I spent years trying to solve the wrong equation," he said. "It wasn't the markets or my father or the code." She smiled sleepily. "Then what was it?" He turned, his eyes meeting hers. "It was me." The words hung in the morning light. Simple, uncalculated, true. He reached for her hand. "Thank you, Clara." "For what?" "For refusing to be bought. For teaching me that love beyond money isn't a myth. It's math you feel instead of prove." She laughed softly, the sound like sunlight. "You finally solved it, Mr. Vale." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Ethan," she repeated. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, slow and sure, not as apology, not as promise, but as acceptance. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that in one small apartment above a laundromat, a man who once measured the world in numbers had finally discovered what couldn't be counted. Subscribe to be part of stories that still believe redemption is worth everything.